Are all sorcerers obliged to transfer their channel to another person? What does it mean when a sorcerer touches someone during the transfer of a channel? Is he merely indicating the person to whom his power will be passed? Do the forces themselves decide to whom the channel will be transferred? And how does one become a sorcerer's apprentice? Thank you very much. You see how many questions arise when it comes to the transfer of a channel. This is an important topic, and we have already discussed it in the General Theory of Magic course, right at the beginning of our work, when we explored how one becomes different from the others, how one becomes a sorcerer, what is required for this, or, conversely, what should be avoided if one has no desire to follow this path, and, ultimately, what must be done if one does wish to embark on it. Now, let us briefly explore this question, as it is indeed very interesting. There is much speculation on the subject, yet everything becomes quite clear once we uncover the inner workings of the process itself. Becoming a sorcerer does not happen by mere desire. However, when the desire to follow the sorcerer's path arises in a person's consciousness, it is never without cause. It suggests that something within them signals that the life, the reality they are living, does not satisfy them. It may suit everyone else, but it does not suit them. Why can they not live like everyone else? Quite simply, because they do not want to. Perhaps they are consciously seeking a different path, a third way, precisely to fulfill this fundamental idea, not to live like everyone else. Thus, the first question they must ask themselves is, what exactly is it about the society I live in that is unacceptable to me? Why do I refuse to accept the world in which those around me, my compatriots and peers, live? And they must find an answer to that question, for without it, nothing will work. This is the very core of future sorcery, the foundation of future magic. What exactly is it in the world around them? What imperfection has their consciousness perceived? And why do they wish to fill that imperfection with themselves, with their own mind, at least within the framework of their own lives? Of course, a person must begin with themselves, with their own perception. What in the world is not right for me? Not for everyone, but for me personally. That is the conscious step on this path, and if taken with awareness, everything becomes a little more logical and far less stressful. For the consciousness of such a person is already prepared to walk this path. And this means that, in that moment, it begins to function at a slightly different frequency. And the magical realm recognizes that frequency, that consciousness, and connects it to those layers of information that will either allow it to manifest in reality or suppress it if it proves to be dysfunctional. A person can manifest this either by finding themselves in certain situations where they act upon their dissatisfaction, or by taking the path of studying sorcery. And along that path, a teacher will come to them. Sooner or later, it always happens. One way or another, destiny will bring them together. And that teacher can take any form. It may be human or non-human. It may be a work of film or literature that leads them down a particular path or fills their consciousness with the knowledge and thoughts they need to form the sense of wholeness they have been missing. However, it is rare for a person to consciously follow this path. Usually, the consciousness of someone who has taken the sorcerer's path does not fully understand what is happening to them. Such a becoming takes place when a person undergoes an extremely intense emotional release, an outburst of such overwhelming, unbearable emotion, an outburst of such unmanageable energy that they simply cannot continue to live with it. Cases like these are quite common and are described in countless legends of how one becomes a sorcerer. That is, a person makes a vow, an oath, that if a certain force relieves them of this unbearable energy, this unendurable emotion, this overwhelming feeling, then perhaps they will do something in return for that force. This emotion could be fear, resentment, disappointment, anything. The person simply cannot cope with it on their own. It is so terrifying, and the event so traumatizing, that they cannot deal with it without the support of the force. And then, in response to their call, a force, a certain informational force from another world, from other spaces, from other realms, answers. This force extracts the energy that the person could not bear. And, seemingly, the situation resolves itself. The person feels better and experiences a kind of relief. In sorceress practice, this relief is called a helper. Something or someone appears and begins to assist the future sorcerer in solving their problems. But what exactly is this helper? At its core, it is none other than the unbearable energy that the future sorcerer has voluntarily rejected, the emotion they were unable to overcome. And this very emotion, whether resentment, disappointment, or intense anxiety, is entirely dependent on the individual's inner emotional strength. In general, it is a highly emotionally charged consciousness, one capable of generating such extreme emotions. After all, there are unemotional people, those who are often called thick-skinned, who live by the principle, well, what's happened has happened. Today, this event has occurred. In 6 months, I'll process it, and maybe I'll worry about it, or maybe I won't, because by then, I'll have no emotions left for such worrying. But there are others, those with a highly developed emotional body, for whom such outbursts happen instantly. These emotions consume them completely. Their vision literally clouds over, and they lack the inner psychological strength to endure them. In such cases, the emotion must be extracted, and this extracted power becomes the foundation of what will later be known as the sorcerer's helper. This emotional substrate serves as the energetic basis for the future program. But every program consists of 2 components, energy and information. A sorcerer himself provides the energy by extracting and unleashing this unendurable emotion, this overwhelming power, this unbearable experience. However, the information that forms the foundation of the program and becomes the sorcerer's helper is supplied by the force that responds to his call. And so, a sorcerer begins to interact with this force. Because such information is never given freely, it is granted for a specific purpose. The force says, I have done you a favor, and now you must do me a favor. Conduct certain informational packets to me. These packets of information depend on the proto-foundation that has answered the call. People exist within 12 proto-foundations, and the ones closest to them are life, death, love, and hate. Typically, the force that responds originates from one of these proto-foundations, filling the unbearable energy with its own informational packets. This is how a sorcerer acquires his specialization in love, specialization in hate, specialization in life, or specialization in death. A specialization in life forms the basis of a healing program, and the sorcerer becomes a healer. A program of death, on the other hand, is responsible for energy damage. A wicked or evil sorcerer is also a form of specialization. A specialization in love pertains to spells that not only unite people, but also attract various elements into a person's life. The proto-foundation, hate, provides packets of rejection and separation, not only dividing people, but also, for instance, severing a person's ties to their circumstances. Therefore, terms such as love, hate, life, and death should not be interpreted in their common layman's sense, as everything is highly relative and depends entirely on the task at hand. However, in human culture, sorcerers with particular specializations have naturally been given specific names. There are healers, benevolent sorcerers who cast love spells, malevolent sorcerers who cast curses, and even those who can bring death. Such notions exist among the people, and although the general public does not concern itself with nuances or details, it perceives these specializations with surprising accuracy, adding layers of its own interpretation. Yet in reality, this is merely specialization. A sorcerer who practices life may bring death, while a sorcerer who practices death may save someone from it. It all depends on the task at hand. But let us return to the process of becoming a sorcerer. This program always remains close to the sorcerer and demands work from him. And because it is in constant interaction with him, the sorcerer's consciousness begins to change. He is no longer alone, as if there are now two of him. This is not exactly a struggle, but rather an inevitable conflict, when something is always beside you, always demanding something of you. Not everyone can withstand such pressure, even from another human being, let alone an otherworldly force. Naturally, through these ongoing interactions with his helper, a sorcerer becomes increasingly detached from human society, for he grows different from the average layman, from the ordinary person. When a sorcerer consciously embarks on this path, he forms such a program himself. Through rituals and specific rites, he makes a deliberate agreement with the force. He knows what information he has received and what work he must perform as part of that agreement. However, for an unconscious sorcerer, one who has unknowingly begun his path, the process of establishing a relationship with his helper may take years, or it may never fully develop within his lifetime. And there is one characteristic that people have observed accurately. Until a sorcerer has passed on his knowledge, he cannot leave this world, this reality. But why is that? Because by law, this rejected part of himself, this emotional part of his being, cannot simply be left behind. A sorcerer must take it back. If he cannot reclaim it, then he must engage in a battle with that part of himself. In essence, it is his own self, his own program, built on an emotion that was once unbearable to him. Once this emotion, this power, this passion, this pain, this resentment was unbearable. But what about now? When a sorcerer departs from this world, he cannot leave anything behind. He must reclaim it and clean up after himself, leaving nothing unnecessary in this reality. And he must face that force in battle, for if he loses, the force will consume him, leading to what is known as soul consumption, complete disembodiment and eternal torment, which has later been described as hell. And what does this torment consist of? If this emotion consumes the sorcerer's consciousness, he will be forced to endure that unbearable emotion ceaselessly. This is precisely what hell is for the human consciousness, to remain trapped in a state that one could not cope with in life. But now, this will be his reality, an unending, inescapable condition that will last until the next incarnation. And so, a sorcerer must enter the battle. If his consciousness is weak, if he has failed to establish contact with his force, if he has not understood what that force is, if he has neither practiced nor performed his work, or has done so insufficiently, then his inner intuition will give him an understanding before he leaves this life. If I, with all my physical strength, could not overcome this, then I will likely be powerless against it now that I am weak. And at that point, only one option remains: to leave this part behind. But how can this be done? This part must be transferred, for it cannot simply be left on its own. And so, the sorcerer is faced with the task of deciding to whom he will pass it. It is usually given either to an apprentice or a blood heir, but the latter is generally preferred. Why is this? Because it is believed that this unbearable part, which the sorcerer himself has rejected, is an aspect of his consciousness. Moreover, this trait does not belong to him alone as an individual, but is also part of his bloodline, meaning that it is passed on through blood. It is a genetic predisposition, so to speak. This means that a blood relative is likely to have the same issue: excessive emotionality and trouble dealing with their own emotions. For this reason, passing it on through blood is considered preferable, which is why sorcerers try to transfer it to a blood relative. A ritual transfer through touch is a standard form of the ritual. A sorcerer either mentally utters the conditional phrase, "I point to him," or pronounces it aloud. However, he usually only whispers it to himself to avoid frightening anyone unnecessarily. At times, the force itself may indicate the person to whom it should be transferred. Typically, it seeks out a consciousness weaker than itself, which is why such helpers often attach themselves to children. Their consciousness is weaker, more pliable, and unresistant. And for this force, this program, it is far easier to reprogram a child's consciousness to suit its own purposes. At the very least, with such a consciousness, there will not be the same conflict as there was with the previous bearer. An aware sorcerer who has consciously chosen this path and understands that the program must either be confronted in a ritual battle or deliberately left behind, will perform a specific ritual and transfer the program into an object, either a so-called power object or what is commonly known as a cursed treasure. From there, it may end up in the hands of some unsuspecting person unfortunate enough to receive such a gift. This is how legends are born: tales of cursed treasures that accidentally fall into someone's possession and turn their life upside down. It is fortunate if such an object becomes some sort of amulet or talisman, something that will help them in life or simply steer their destiny in a particular direction. More often, however, such treasures are truly cursed, much like a genie in a bottle that has been imprisoned for 1,000 years and, once unwittingly released, begins to build castles and destroy them, along with the one who set it free. The situation here is much the same. When the program is hungry, when it has gone too long without absorbing energy and feeding, it begins to draw energy from wherever it can reach. And the first source it turns to is the sorcerer himself. It is this effect that underlies all the legends about summoning demons, spirits, and other entities from the other world, beings that, upon crossing over, begin to consume energy. And the first to suffer are the summoners themselves, as they are the closest and most accessible vessel of energy. If this gift, this object of power, is transferred through touch or blood, then it is passed on by agreement. This means that the program will not kill its bearer. It will only transform them. It will alter their destiny, reshape their worldview, and attune them to fulfill a certain key mission in this world. Not one of their own choosing, but one required by their force. The informational entity from the informational world. This entity once filled the unbearable energy with its own information, thereby forming the program, the sorcerer's helper program. Across various cultures, these helpers are known by different names. They are called demons, devils, fetch, and philia. In different traditions, they bear different titles. And naturally, those who respect their helpers refer to them accordingly, while those who fear them call them demons, devils, or other derogatory terms that reflect their cultural perceptions. How does one become a sorcerer's apprentice? I tried to answer that at the beginning. If this is your conscious path, you will be led to it, especially if you seek it out, especially if you perform a ritual. Rituals, too, vary depending on the tradition you belong to or wish to work within. In any case, it will be your own individual path, uniquely tailored to you. So, determine your goal and define your inner core. What exactly dissatisfies you in life? You personally, not someone else. Clarify your personal stance, and from there, your life path will shift, either towards the sorceress path or towards immersing yourself in the circumstances of life that may help you resolve your dissatisfaction without resorting to a complete transformation of destiny. Because taking the path of the sorcerer is a one-way ticket, and you must understand this very well.